Imagine a time when absolutely nothing existed. No light, no sound, no life, just a vast emptiness. This is where the creation story begins. But at the exact second everything we know was sparked into existence. This is the epic tale of how our world was born. How the first humans lived and how everything shattered with one fatal choice. A story of beauty and heartbreak, of love and loss that would shape humanity forever. In the very beginning, as Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 tells us, God created the heavens and the earth. But the earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the deep waters while the Spirit of God hovered over the surface.
Picture a time when absolutely nothing existed. No light, no sound, no life. Just a vast emptiness. This is where the creation story begins. Not with people or places, but at the exact second everything we know was sparked into existence. This is the epic tale of how our world was born, how the first humans lived, and how everything shattered with one fatal choice. It is a story of beauty and heartbreak, of love and loss that would shape humanity forever. In the very beginning, as Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 tells us, God created the heavens and the earth, but the earth was nothing like it is today. Verse 2 paints a picture of total emptiness. The earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the deep waters, while the Spirit of God hovered over the surface. Then something incredible happened. God spoke, and blinding light burst into existence. Genesis chapter 1 verse 3 records his first powerful words, "Let there be light," and there was light. Imagine that first beam piercing the endless darkness. God saw that the light was good, so he separated it from the dark, calling them day and night. This marked the very first day. On the second day, God looked at the endless water and created space, dividing the waters above from the waters below to form the sky. As verse 7 explains, God made the vault, separating the waters beneath from the waters above. And it was so. He called this vast space sky. The third day brought even greater wonders. God gathered the oceans together and let dry ground emerge. But he was just getting started. The dry land was empty, so he covered it with vibrant life. God commanded the earth to produce plants and seed-bearing vegetation and fruit trees of every kind. And it was so. Genesis chapter 1 verse 11 tells us that suddenly green grass sprouted and flowers bloomed and trees grew tall and strong. On day 4, God painted the heavens. He created the sun to rule the day and the moon for the night. As Genesis chapter 1 verse 16 describes, God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He also scattered the stars. Every single star was placed in the heavens by his hand. On the fifth day, God filled the oceans and the skies with life. Genesis chapter 1 verse 21 reveals this incredible moment. So God created the giant sea monsters and every living creature that swarms in the waters, along with every winged bird flying across the sky, each according to their kinds. Fish crowded the oceans, birds soared through the air, and God saw that it was good. Then came the sixth day. First, God made the land animals, but then he did something entirely different. Genesis chapter 1 verse 26 records his decree. Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so they can rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the livestock, the wild beasts, and every creature crawling on the ground. This was the exact moment the very first humans were brought into existence. After 6 days of intense creation, God did something that might surprise you. Genesis chapter 2 tells us that by the seventh day, God had finished his work. So on the seventh day, he rested. God blessed this day and made it holy, dedicating it as a day of rest from all his majestic work of creation. Now let us look closer at how God crafted the first human. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 reveals the beautiful details. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, breathing the breath of life into his nostrils, and he became a living soul. God did not just speak Adam into existence like the stars. He got his hands dirty, shaping him from the clay and breathing his own life into him. That is how precious humans were to the Creator. Knowing Adam needed a perfect home, God planted a lush garden in a place called Eden. Genesis chapter 2 describes it. The Lord God planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and placed the man there. Out of the ground he made every beautiful tree grow, trees that were gorgeous to look at and amazing for food. This was not just a garden, it was paradise. Two unique trees stood in the center, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. Rivers flowed through Eden, keeping everything vibrant and green. Adam had everything he could ever dream of, but God also gave him a purpose. As Genesis chapter 2 verse 15 explains, God put him in the garden to cultivate and guard it. Adam was no slacker. He was the world's very first caretaker, tending to this magnificent home God designed. Yet God saw a void in Adam's life. Genesis chapter 2 verse 18 records his words, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper perfect for him." Even in paradise, he needed a true partner. So God brought the animals to Adam to see what he would name them, as Genesis tells us. The Lord God had formed every beast of the field and bird of the air. He led them to the man, watching to see what he would call each one. Whatever Adam named each living creature, that became its official name. He cataloged all the livestock, the birds of the sky, and the wild beasts. But among them all, no true partner was found. So God put Adam into a deep sleep, took one of his ribs, and beautifully crafted woman. When Adam awoke and saw her, his heart leaped with pure joy. Genesis chapter 2 captures his excitement. "This is finally bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." Scripture tells us they were both naked, yet they felt absolutely no shame. They lived in total harmony with each other and God. No fear, no insecurity, no conflict, just pure, innocent love. Life in Eden was flawless, but God gave them one rule. Genesis chapter 2 records his boundary. "You are free to eat from any tree in this garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For the moment you eat from it, you will surely die." Just one rule in a vast paradise. Out of thousands of options, only one tree was off limits. It seemed so simple. Then a serpent appeared. This was no ordinary snake, but the most cunning creature God had formed. Genesis chapter 3 introduces him. The serpent was more clever than any animal the Lord God had made. He hissed to the woman, "Did God really say you cannot eat from any tree here?" Watch how craftily the serpent moved. He did not outright tell Eve to rebel. Instead, he planted a simple question, forcing her to question God's boundary from a completely different angle. Eve defended the rule, explaining they could eat from any tree except one. If they tasted its fruit or even brushed against it, they would surely die. That is when the serpent struck. Genesis 3 verses 4 and 5 records his deception. "You will not die." The snake promised her that eating the fruit would open their eyes, making them like God, understanding good and evil. Those deceptive words shifted reality forever. Suddenly, Eve viewed the forbidden tree in a new light. Genesis 3 verse 6 details her descent. She saw the fruit was delicious, beautiful to look at, and desirable for gaining wisdom. So she reached out, took the fruit, and ate. She then handed some to her husband beside her. and he ate too. In that single instant, paradise shattered. Genesis 3 verse 7 tells us their eyes flew open and they suddenly realized they were completely naked. Terrified, they stitched fig leaves together to cover their bodies. For the very first time, human hearts felt crushing shame and fear as God walked through the garden in the cool breeze, just like before Adam and Eve fled. Genesis 3 verses 8 and 9 captures this tragic turn. They heard the soft sound of the Lord God walking through the garden in the cool evening. Stricken with guilt, the couple hid from his presence among the thick forest trees. But the Lord God called out to him, asking where he was. God already knew their location, but he wanted to give them space to confess their betrayal. But when Adam spoke, his words revealed how quickly corruption had poisoned his soul. Genesis 3 verse 12 captures his tragic excuse. He said, "That woman you gave me, she handed me the fruit, so I ate it." Adam did not just dodge his own guilt here. He actually pointed fingers at both his wife and his Creator. When God questioned the woman, she also dodged the blame, crying out in verse 13, "The serpent tricked me, so I ate." The Lord's response to this rebellion was righteous, severe, and deeply sorrowful. First, he turned his focus to the snake. Genesis 3 verses 14 and 15 records the ultimate curse. The Lord God declared to the serpent, "Because of your deceit, you are cursed above all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust for the rest of your days. I will spark war between you and the woman, and between your descendants and hers. Her offspring will crush your head, while you only strike his heel." Then God faced Eve. Genesis 3 verse 16 details the heavy burden placed on women. He told her that her pain in childbearing would be multiplied intensely. In agonizing labor, you will deliver children. Your desire will pull toward your husband, yet he will rule over your life. Adam faced a different but equally devastating consequence. Genesis 3 verses 17 to 19 records his judgment. "Because you chose to listen to your wife and ate from the forbidden tree, the soil is now cursed directly because of what you did. Through backbreaking labor, you will scrape food from it your entire life. It will sprout thorns and weeds, forcing you to eat wild plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will earn your bread, until you return to the dirt. You were taken from the earth, you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Labor, once a joyful blessing in Eden, became a grinding struggle. The earth itself would resist them, and, most tragic of all, mortality had invaded their world. Yet even in wrath, God offered grace. Genesis 3 verse 21 reveals that the Lord made garments of animal skins to clothe them, showing tender care despite their rebellion. Then came the terrifying moment of exile. God explained exactly why paradise was lost. Genesis 3 verses 22 to 24 records his reasoning. "The Lord God declared, humanity has now become like us, understanding good and evil. They must not stretch out their hands to eat from the tree of life and live forever in this broken state. Therefore the Creator banished them from the Garden of Eden, sending them to till the harsh ground from which they were formed. Following their exile, he stationed mighty guardian cherubim on the east side of Eden, alongside a swirling flaming sword that flashed to block any path back to the tree of life. Adam and Eve now stood in a harsh, broken wilderness, locked out of paradise forever by their own choice. Yet life outside Eden had to go on. Genesis chapter 4 verses 1 and 2 introduces the very first children. Eve conceived and gave birth to their firstborn son, Cain. She praised God for bringing a male child into the world. Later, she bore his brother, Abel. As they grew, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain farmed the land. Both boys grew up in a reality vastly different from what their parents once knew. They had never tasted paradise, nor walked with the Creator in perfect peace. Yet they acknowledged God and brought him sacrifices. Genesis 4 verses 3 and 4 depicts their ritual. In time, Cain presented a portion of his harvest to the Lord. Meanwhile, Abel offered the finest select fat portions from the very firstborn of his sheep. The Lord looked with favor upon Abel and his sacrifice. But Cain and his offering were rejected. We may not know the exact reason, but the fundamental difference lay in their hearts. Abel offered his absolute finest, the choice cuts of his firstborn livestock. Cain merely gathered some ordinary crops, showing no special devotion. This rejection filled Cain with burning rage. His expression darkened as bitter jealousy consumed his soul. Yet a merciful God stepped in to warn him. Genesis 4 verses 6 and 7 captures God's plea. Why are you so furious? Why do you look so defeated? If you choose to do what is right, you will be accepted. But if you refuse, sin is crouching at your doorstep, eager to master you. You must conquer it. God offered Cain a precious window of grace. He warned him that sin was a predator waiting to strike. But Cain had to find the strength to resist. Tragically, Cain surrendered to his anger. Genesis 4 verse 8 records the dark outcome. Cain lured his brother Abel, saying, "Let us walk out into the fields." Once they were alone, Cain turned on Abel and murdered him. This marked the very first homicide in human history. Brother slaughtering brother, out of pure, bitter envy. When God inquired about Abel, Cain's response exposed just how cold and rotten his soul had become. Genesis 4 verse 9 records his defiant reply. "I do not know," he lied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" But God knew the truth. Genesis 4 verses 10 to 12 details his response. "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the dirt. Now you are cursed, driven from the very ground that opened up to swallow your brother's blood from your hands. When you farm the soil, it will never yield its crops for you again. You are doomed to wander the earth forever, restless." Cain's punishment was heavy, yet it could have been far worse. When he cried out that his sentence was too hard to bear, fearing that anyone who found him would kill him, God showed mercy. Genesis chapter 4 verse 15 tells us, "The Lord said, 'Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer sevenfold vengeance.'" So the Lord placed a mark on Cain to protect him from being killed. Even in the middle of judgment, God guarded his life. After murdering his brother, Cain abandoned his family and fled to the land of Nod, east of Eden. There, his wife bore a son named Enoch, and Cain built the very first city, naming it after his boy. Genesis chapter 4 verse 17 records this. Cain made love to his wife. She became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was building a city then, and he named it after Enoch. Cain's descendants went on to found human civilization as we know it. They simply weren't satisfied with a quiet life. They invented new lifestyles, tools, and art. Genesis chapter 4 verses 19 through 22 introduces us to some of Cain's most famous descendants. Lamech married two women, Ada and Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal, who became the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother was named Jubal, and he was the father of everyone who plays the harp and flute. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged tools from bronze and iron. These brothers were true innovators. Jubal pioneered the nomadic life, moving herds from place to place, while Jubal brought music to life with the first harps and flutes. Tubal-Cain became the world's first metal worker, shaping bronze and iron. Yet as civilization advanced, so did the violence. Lamech, a descendant of Cain, turned out even more violent than his ancestor. Genesis chapter 4 records his boastful song to his wives Ada and Zillah. "Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. I killed a man just for wounding me, a youth for bruising me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, than Lamech 77 times. Lamech actually bragged about his brutality. He didn't kill in a sudden fit of jealousy like Cain did, but over a minor scratch. Darkness was spreading across the earth. Meanwhile, back home, Adam and Eve kept moving forward. They had lost Abel, and Cain was exiled, but God blessed them with another son. Genesis chapter 4 verse 25 tells us that Adam held his wife again, and she gave birth to a son. She named him Seth, declaring that God had granted her another child in place of Abel. Seth represented a fresh start, a chance for mankind to walk a different path than the bloody road Cain chose. And honestly, something beautiful began in Seth's family line. Genesis chapter 4 verse 26 records this turning point. Seth had a son and named him Enosh. Around that time, people finally began to call on the name of the Lord. It was a massive shift. While Cain's line built fortress cities and forged tools, Seth's descendants sought the Lord. They remembered their Creator, lifting his name in worship and prayer. Genesis chapter 5 traces this godly lineage filled with remarkable souls. Take Enoch, for example, who walked closely with God. Then he simply vanished because God took him home. Genesis chapter 5 verse 24 shares this incredible moment. Enoch was so close to God that he was taken straight to heaven, escaping death entirely. Life expectancies back then were mind-blowing. Adam lived 930 years. Seth reached 912. Methuselah, the oldest man in history, made it to 969. Genesis records he lived 969 years, and then he died. These massive lifespans show how different the ancient world was. People lived for centuries, gathering deep wisdom and experience over generations, watching multiple generations of their families grow. Yet even in Seth's faithful line, the shadow of death was never far away. Time and again, Genesis chapter 5 echoes the chilling words, "And then he died." The curse of death, sparked by Eden's rebellion, claimed everyone. As the human population exploded, a dark shift occurred. The faithful line of Seth and the corrupt line of Cain began to intermarry, with disastrous results. Genesis chapter 6 describes the beginning of the end. As humans multiplied across the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw how beautiful these women were, taking whoever they wanted as wives. This compromise triggered a spiritual collapse. The very families who once worshipped the Lord slowly turned their backs and forgot him. Evil and violence spread like wildfire across the earth. God watched it all unfold, and his heart broke. Genesis chapter 6 contains some of the saddest words in Scripture. The Lord saw how deeply human wickedness had corrupted the earth. Every single thought, every desire of the human heart was purely evil, all day, every day. The Lord was grieved that he had ever made humans, and his heart was filled with pain. Just imagine that level of sorrow. He had handcrafted them in his own image, breathed life into their lungs, and given them a paradise to call home. Yet now they chose darkness over light, plotting evil constantly. The violence that began with Cain slaying Abel had now poisoned the entire globe. Genesis chapter 6 verse 11 says the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. This wasn't just isolated sin anymore. The entire planet was drowning in cruelty and corruption. So God made a devastating choice recorded in Genesis chapter 6 verse 7. The Lord declared, "I will wipe this human race from the face of the earth, and with them the beasts, birds, and crawling things. For I am deeply grieved that I ever made them." A world birthed in beauty and hope had decayed so terribly that God resolved to sweep it clean. Yet even in absolute judgment, his grace would break through. Genesis chapter 6 verse 8 sparks a ray of hope. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Creation had led to paradise, then rebellion, murder, advanced culture, and ultimately, utter ruin. But the story did not end there. God had a rescue plan for humanity, focused on one faithful man and his household. Amidst a world drowning in pure wickedness, a single man stood his ground. His name was Noah, and Genesis chapter 6 verse 9 introduces him. This is the story of Noah and his line. He was a truly righteous man, blameless among the corrupt crowd of his generation, walking hand in hand with God. While humanity forgot their Creator, Noah remembered. As the world chose violence and darkness, he chose to walk in God's light. Noah wasn't a perfect man. No human except Jesus ever was. Yet in a dark era where every human thought was constantly twisted and evil, Noah's heart stood out. He loved God and walked faithfully. Genesis chapter 6 verse 9 tells us he was blameless among his generation. This does not mean he was without flaws, but compared to the chaos around him, he sought righteousness. And God noticed his quiet obedience. Even as God prepared to wash away the corrupt earth, he chose to spare Noah and his family. Genesis chapter 6 verse 13 captures the dramatic moment God spoke. God declared to Noah, "I am going to bring an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. I will surely destroy them with the earth." Can you imagine the weight on Noah's heart? Everyone he knew, his neighbors, his lifelong friends, maybe even his relatives, faced absolute destruction. His entire world was vanishing forever. The sheer terror and deep heartbreak of that moment must have been overwhelming. Yet God had a plan to preserve life and start anew. Genesis chapter 6 verses 18 and 19 reveals his promise. "But I will establish my covenant with you. You will enter the ark, you and your sons, your wife and your sons' wives. You must bring 2 of every living creature into the vessel, male and female, to keep them alive alongside you." God was placing a monumental burden on Noah far beyond just saving his own family. He entrusted Noah with preserving every species on earth. This was the ultimate rescue mission in human history, and Noah was chosen to lead it. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, along with their wives, would be the sole human survivors of the deluge. From this small group, the entire earth would be repopulated. The fate of mankind rested squarely on his shoulders. Amazingly, Noah never argued or demanded a single sign. Genesis chapter 6 verse 22 simply states, Noah did everything just as God commanded him. When told to build, he built. When told to gather, he gathered. His faith was instant and absolute. God gave him precise blueprints for the vessel, detailed in Genesis chapter 6, verses 14 through 16. Build yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make compartments inside and coat it with pitch, both inside and out. This is how you will construct it. The ark must be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Create a roof, leaving an opening of 1 cubit high all around. Place a door in the side and build lower, middle, and upper decks. This was no ordinary boat. Since a cubit is about 18 inches, the ark was roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. That is longer than a modern football field and towering like a 4-story building. This massive ship needed 3 decks to house thousands of animals and years of supplies. Constructing a vessel of this scale took decades. Noah had to fell endless trees, mill the timber, and assemble it all by hand without any power tools. Day after day as he labored on this monstrous ship, his neighbors surely mocked his efforts. They lived nowhere near an ocean, and heavy rain was completely unheard of. Yet Noah kept building, trusting God's ultimate plan. Genesis chapter 7 verse 5 notes that Noah did all the Lord commanded. He was 600 years old when the deluge hit, meaning he had labored on this massive task for decades, ignoring the mockery of the world. As the vessel neared completion, God spoke to him once more. Genesis chapter 7, verses 1 through 3 records the call. The Lord said, "Go into the ark, you and your household, for you alone are righteous before me. Bring 7 pairs of every clean animal, a male and its mate, and a single pair of each unclean beast, male and female, along with 7 pairs of every bird, to preserve their offspring across the face of the flooded earth." Then came the most miraculous turn of events. How on earth do you gather 2 of every creature into a single location? How do you coax lions and lambs, massive elephants, and tiny mice to board peacefully? You do not have to. God does. Genesis chapter 7, verses 8 and 9 records that pairs of animals, including birds and creeping things, male and female, approached Noah and entered the vessel just as God had commanded. They came of their own accord. God summoned them, and they obeyed. Predators walked beside prey. Lions and lambs marched in perfect peace. Eagles soared alongside tiny sparrows. It felt like Eden restored, with wild creatures living in beautiful, silent harmony. Genesis chapter 7, verses 13 through 16 marks the final hour. On that day, Noah, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, his wife and their wives, entered the safety of the ark. They brought every wild beast and every domestic animal, each according to its own kind, every insect crawling on the earth, and every bird of the air according to their kinds, every single winged creature. Pairs of all living beings carrying the very breath of life came to Noah and entered the safety of the vessel, male and female, just as God commanded him. Then the Lord shut him in. Let those powerful words sink in. God himself sealed the massive door of the ark. Once closed, grace had ended and judgment began. Those inside were protected. Those outside faced the coming wrath. For 7 long days they sat locked in the silence. Absolutely nothing happened. Can you feel the tension of those silent days? Noah and his family sat in the darkness of the vessel, waiting for a phenomenon they had never witnessed. Rain. Then it started. Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 and 12 details the shift. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, the ancient springs of the deep ruptured, and the floodgates of heaven were unleashed, and rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. This was no passing storm. The great subterranean oceans surged upward. Water geysered from the earth. The skies shattered, sending a relentless deluge pouring from above. The entire planet was trapped between 2 colossal oceans. The torrent never ceased. Day and night, the heavy floodwaters kept rising. Genesis chapter 7, verse 17 says, "For 40 days the deluge poured over the land. As the waters rose, they lifted the ark high above the earth." At first, the people outside probably shrugged it off as a bad storm. They ran for shelter, expecting it to clear. But as hours turned to days, and days became weeks, they realized a terrible judgment had arrived. The rising tide just kept swallowing the land. Genesis chapter 7 shows us how total the devastation was. The waters rose so fiercely that every high mountain under heaven was completely submerged. The flood rose to cover the mountains by more than 15 cubits. Every peak on earth was submerged, disappearing entirely beneath the relentless deep waters. The entire world became a vast, lonely ocean with just one vessel floating on its surface. Genesis chapter 7 describes this tragic end. Every living creature on dry land perished. Birds, livestock, and wild beasts, every creature swarming over the land and all of humanity. Everything on dry ground with the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing was completely wiped out. Humans, beasts, creeping things, and the birds of the air were erased from existence. Only Noah remained safe inside the vessel with those who joined him. It is hard to grasp such absolute ruin. Everyone who had mocked Noah was gone. Every creature that failed to enter the ark had drowned. Every plant, tree, and living thing that required air had perished. The beautiful earth God had filled with life was now nothing but a silent, watery grave. Just 8 souls survived in the whole world. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. They drifted alone on a limitless sea, carrying the future of all earthly life inside their vessel. Living on board must have been unlike anything they had ever known. Genesis chapter 7 tells us the waters flooded the earth for 150 days, though the downpour lasted 40 days and nights. During those first 40 days, Noah and his family endured the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. Inside their wooden sanctuary, heavy darkness likely reigned most of the time. The sole source of light filtered through a narrow opening near the ceiling, where the air was thick with the sounds and scents of thousands of beasts. Lions roared, elephants trumpeted, birds chirped, and countless other creatures filled the air with their cries. Yet a miracle was unfolding inside this floating sanctuary. The beasts did not act on their wild instincts, and predators refused to hunt their prey. Peace reigned, just as it had when they first marched inside. God was supernaturally keeping perfect harmony among all these diverse wild creatures. Noah and his family faced grueling daily chores. Thousands of animals required food, fresh water, and constant cleanup. In such a crowded space, their work was never truly finished. They had to feed the massive elephants, provide fresh water for the birds, and ensure the tiny creatures did not get trampled or injured. Scripture leaves out the daily routine inside the ark, but we can easily imagine the immense trials. How do you feed lions without sacrificing other beasts? How do you keep thousands of wild beasts healthy in tight confinement? How do you survive the suffocating odor and the constant deafening roar? Yet through every challenge, God watched over them. The vessel was custom built for this very mission. Spacious enough to shelter every passenger and animal, it stood strong against the most violent tempest in human history, sealed tight to keep everyone safe and dry inside. Noah and his family surely spent hours in prayer and deep conversation. They were the sole human survivors, carrying an unimaginable weight of responsibility on their shoulders. Once the deluge subsided, they would have to rebuild civilization from scratch. They also had to bear the heavy burden of knowing what had occurred outside. Feeding the beasts and maintaining their ship, each day they lived with the grim reality that everything they once knew was gone. Every home they visited, every friend they knew, had vanished forever. Yet hope flickered in the dark. God saved them for a divine purpose and promised a holy covenant with Noah. As the waters eventually receded, they would step onto a cleansed earth to start anew. After 40 long days, the torrential rains finally ceased, yet the vessel did not ground immediately. Genesis chapter 8 tells us that God remembered Noah and all the wild beasts and livestock sealed inside with him, and he sent a wind across the earth to make the waters recede. The subterranean fountains and the floodgates of heaven were closed, and the rain was held back. The floodwaters steadily retreated from the land as God sent a powerful wind to dry the earth. Painfully slowly, the water levels began to drop. It had taken 40 days to drown the world, but draining it would take much longer. Scripture records a crucial moment next. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Finally, after months of drifting, their vessel touched solid ground, yet they remained trapped inside. The mountain peaks were still mostly submerged, prompting Noah to seek answers about the world outside. So he decided to release birds to scout the area. Genesis chapter 8 tells us, after 40 days, Noah opened the window he had built and released a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the ground dried up. The raven found places to perch, but it brought no real news back to the family. So Noah tried a different bird, as Genesis chapter 8 describes. He sent out a gentle dove to see if the waters had finally cleared from the ground. But the dove found no place to rest, because the endless waters still covered the face of the earth, forcing it to return to Noah in the vessel. Reaching out his hand, he pulled the bird back inside the safety of the ark. The dove had searched for dry land, but found absolutely nothing yet. Noah waited another 7 days before releasing the dove a second time. Genesis chapter 8 records that he waited and sent her out once more from the ship. When the bird returned that evening, a freshly plucked olive leaf was clasped in its beak. At that moment, Noah knew the waters were finally dropping. An olive leaf. It was the very first sign of emerging life, proof that plants were growing once more on earth. Noah must have felt immense joy beholding that green leaf. Noah waited another 7 days and sent the dove out a third time. As Genesis records, after waiting 7 more days, Noah sent the dove out once again. This time, it never came back. It had finally found a home. The dry earth was ready. Yet Noah patiently waited for God to tell him it was time. Genesis chapter 8, verses 13 and 14, highlights his faithful obedience. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the floodwaters had dried up. He pulled back the covering of the ark and saw dry ground ahead. By the 27th day of the second month, the ground was totally dry. After more than a year inside the ark, God finally told them they could step out. Genesis chapter 8, verses 15 and 16 records the moment God spoke, telling Noah to step out of the ark with his wife, his sons, and their wives. As they walked out, they stepped into a completely transformed world. Genesis chapter 8, verses 18 and 19 describes this dramatic moment. So Noah emerged alongside his sons, his wife, and his daughters-in-law. Right behind them came every beast, crawling creature, and bird escaping their long confinement. Every living creature streamed out of the ark, group by group. Yet Noah's very first act was not to build a shelter or plant a crop. Genesis chapter 8, verse 20 tells us that Noah built an altar to the Lord, taking some of the clean animals and birds to offer as burnt sacrifices. His absolute first response in this new world was worship, pouring out his gratitude for survival. This sacred offering was deeply significant, and Noah carefully chose clean animals. Remember, he had brought 7 pairs of these clean beasts instead of just 2. Now he was offering back to God the very creatures that had been used to preserve his family. God was deeply moved by Noah's offering. Genesis chapter 8, verse 21 records that the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and spoke in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground because of humans, even though the intent of the human heart is prone to evil from youth. And I will never again wipe out every living thing as I just did." This was a breathtaking promise of grace, made even though God knew mankind would fall back into sin. Knowing that the human heart is broken from youth, he still promised never to send another global flood. God was giving humanity a fresh start. Genesis chapter 8, verse 22 offers one of Scripture's most comforting assurances. As long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never fail. God was assuring them that the fundamental rhythms of creation would remain. Seasons would change, day would follow night, and planting and harvesting would continue. Then God gave Noah's family vital instructions for their future. Genesis chapter 9 records his blessing. God blessed Noah and his sons, telling them to be fruitful, multiply, and repopulate the earth. He declared that fear and dread of humans would now fall upon every beast, bird, and living creature, on everything that crawls upon the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. They are now placed into your hands. Every living, moving thing will now be food for you. Just as I once gave you green plants, I now give you everything. This mirrored God's original command to Adam and Eve, but with critical changes. For the first time, humans were permitted to eat meat, not just plants, and beasts would now fear humans rather than living in the perfect harmony once found in Eden. But along with this freedom, God set a strict boundary. Genesis chapter 9, verses 4 through 6 records his decree. You must not eat meat with its lifeblood still in it, and for your own lifeblood, I will demand a reckoning. I will demand justice from any beast and from every human being. I will hold them fully accountable for the life of another. Whoever sheds human blood by humans, shall their blood be shed, because God made mankind in his own image. God was making it absolutely clear that all life is sacred. It could not be carelessly wasted. Human life is exceptionally sacred, crafted in the divine image, meaning murder would carry the ultimate consequence. Then God established a beautiful covenant with Noah and his family. Genesis chapter 9, verses 11 through 13 details this eternal promise. Never again will a great flood destroy all living things. Never again will waters devastate the earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me, you, and every living creature. This covenant is for all future generations. I have set my rainbow in the clouds to serve as the token of my promise to the earth." This rainbow became God's signature in the sky. Whenever Noah's family saw it arching after a storm, they would remember his solemn pledge to never again flood the earth. It stood as a radiant sign of hope, reminding them that God always keeps his word. Genesis chapter 9, verses 14 through 16 unfolds this depth. Whenever clouds gather and the rainbow appears, I will remember my covenant with you and all living things. The waters will never again rise to form a flood that wipes out life. When that bow shines in the clouds, I will look upon it and remember this everlasting promise between God and every living creature on the earth. Once the drama of the great flood subsided, Noah returned to a quiet, ordinary life. Genesis chapter 9, verse 20 says he began working the soil, planting a vineyard. He became a simple farmer, harvesting grapes and making wine. It felt like a peaceful retirement, but a dark turn soon revealed that even this righteous patriarch was deeply flawed. Genesis chapter 9, verse 21 reveals that after drinking too much of his own wine, he lay drunk and naked in his tent. Noah was completely incapacitated, stripped of his dignity. This was deeply humiliating and scandalous, especially for the chosen savior of the human race. It proves that even the most faithful souls are prone to fall. The aftermath exposes the true character of his sons. Genesis chapter 9, verses 22 and 23 tells us that Ham saw his father exposed and quickly ran to tell his brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a heavy robe, draped it over their shoulders, and walked in backward to cover their father's bare body. Keeping their faces turned away, they refused to gaze upon his nakedness. Meanwhile, Ham had looked at his father's shame, and instead of quietly protecting him, he went out to gossip. He seemed to treat his father's fall as a joke. But Shem and Japheth responded with genuine honor and love. They shielded his vulnerability without a single glance, guarding his dignity when he was completely unable to protect it himself. When Noah woke up and realized what had happened, his reaction was swift and severe. Genesis chapter 9 records his intense words. The moment he sobered up and discovered what his youngest son had done, he declared, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of servants shall he be to his brothers." He added, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be Shem's servant. May God expand the territory of Japheth, letting him share the tents of Shem, and let Canaan serve Japheth as well." This heavy curse on Canaan and the blessings on Shem and Japheth would completely reshape the course of human history. Out of Shem would rise the Hebrew people chosen to bring divine blessings to the world. Japheth's lineage would scatter far and wide, forming many different nations, while Canaan's line faced judgment for their ancestors' disrespect. After the great deluge, Noah lived another 350 years, reaching the incredible age of 950. Genesis chapter 9 wraps up his legacy, noting that he lived 350 years after the flood, then finally passed away. As generations came and went, Noah's sons had children, and those children had families of their own. Once again, the human population began to multiply. Genesis chapter 10 opens this new era, detailing the family line of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who all bore sons of their own after the floodwaters receded. This passage is known by scholars as the famous Table of Nations, a historic roadmap of the diverse people groups born from Noah's 3 sons. From Shem rose the Semitic tribes, ultimately leading to Abraham and Israel. From Ham came different peoples who settled across Africa and the Middle East. Japheth's descendants migrated far, eventually populating Europe and parts of Asia. But in those early days, humanity remained clustered in a single region. Genesis chapter 11 records that the entire world spoke a single language. As people migrated toward the east, they discovered a vast plain in Shinar and settled there. A single language meant perfect connection. There were no complex language barriers, no cultural divides, and no misunderstandings. They collaborated as one massive family. Yet instead of scattering to fill the earth as the Creator commanded, they chose to cling together and construct a monument to their own greatness. Genesis chapter 11 details their ambitious plan. They said to one another, "Come, let us make sturdy bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used manufactured brick instead of stone and asphalt for mortar. Then they urged, "Come, let us build a massive city and a tower reaching to the heavens to make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered across the face of the earth." This legendary structure was not a mere architectural marvel. It was an act of pure defiance and pride. They sought to glorify their own names instead of honoring God. They refused to spread out, ignoring the divine command to go forth and populate the earth. They tried to carve their own path to heaven, relying on human strength rather than God. But the Almighty watched, knowing exactly where this road of rebellion would lead. Genesis chapter 11, verses 5 and 6 reveals his response. The Lord came down to observe the city and the high tower they were constructing. The Lord remarked, "If they can do this as one people speaking a single tongue, then absolutely nothing they plan to achieve will be out of their reach." When humanity unites in open rebellion against the Creator, their potential for evil is limitless. God had witnessed this depth of darkness before the flood, and he refused to let history repeat itself. So he intervened with a move that halted the construction. Genesis chapter 11, verses 7 and 8 records God saying, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they cannot understand one another." In an instant, the Lord scattered them across the globe, bringing the building to a grinding halt. Suddenly, laborers on the site could not comprehend a single word. Architects could not explain blueprints. Families could no longer speak with their neighbors. Bitter frustration replaced their grand progress. Genesis chapter 11 verse 9 tells us the place was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the languages of the entire world. From that spot, the Lord dispersed them across the globe. Interestingly, the name Babel sounds almost identical to the Hebrew word meaning confused. What began as a monument of human pride ended as a symbol of utter chaos and failure. The legendary tower stood half-built as families were forced to scatter across the earth, forming unique nations with separate tongues. Yet this scattering was not just a punishment, it was also a mercy. By splitting humanity into separate language groups, the Almighty kept them from easily joining forces in another massive rebellion against Him. In doing so, He fulfilled His original command to populate the earth, despite their stubborn resistance. The tragic story of Babel proves that human defiance will always collapse before God's authority. We might try to carve our own path to heaven, seek personal fame, and oppose the divine will. But the sovereign Lord's plans always prevail. The earth would be populated exactly as He intended from the start, even if it required a display of judgment rather than willing obedience. Once the chaos at Babel scattered humanity across the globe, most of the population gradually forgot the one true Creator. They turned to worshiping idols of wood and cold stone, serving useless gods who could neither hear nor help them. Yet God never lost sight of His promise to bless humanity through a chosen lineage. Deep in the ancient city of Ur of the Chaldeans, there lived a man named Abram. His father was Terah, and he had two brothers, Nahor and Haran. Genesis chapter 11, verses 27 and 28 outlines their genealogy. This is the record of Terah's descendants. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still living, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the place of his birth. Ur was a rich, advanced city, boasting grand structures and incredible wealth. Its citizens worshipped the pagan moon goddess and other false deities. Abram grew up completely surrounded by this idolatry, which was deeply embedded in his culture. His own family likely kept household statues that they prayed to daily. But then an extraordinary moment changed everything. The ultimate creator of heaven and earth spoke directly to Abram. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, records this life-altering encounter. The Lord commanded Abram, "Leave your country, your close relatives, and your father's house, and journey to the land I will reveal to you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name honored, and you will become a blessing. I will favor those who bless you, and whoever demeans you, I will curse. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." Imagine what God was demanding of him: to walk away from everything he knew, leave behind his country, his family, his father's house, head to an unnamed land, trust blindly in impossible promises. Abram was 75 years old, and his wife Sarai was barren. How could he father a great nation without any children? Yet Abram put his trust in God. Genesis 12, verses 4 through 5 highlights his instant obedience. Abram set out just as the Lord directed, taking Lot along. He was 75 when he left Haran. Gathering his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all their accumulated wealth, and the people acquired in Haran, they departed for the land of Canaan, and they successfully arrived. Interestingly, Abram had already begun this journey. His father Terah had started moving toward Canaan, but settled in Haran, where his life eventually ended. Now God called Abram to complete what his father had started. This massive trek to Canaan was grueling and highly dangerous. No maps either, no shelters, no resting stations. They journeyed slowly through strange lands, herding their livestock, servants, and entire livelihoods. Every day meant searching for fresh water grazing pasture and secure campsites to survive the night. Reaching Canaan at last, Genesis 12, verses 6 and 7, reveals their situation. Abram traversed the land to the great tree of Moreh at Shechem, while the Canaanites still occupied the region. There the Lord appeared, promising, "I will give this land to your offspring." In response, Abram built an altar to honor the God who spoke to him. This marked the precise moment God pointed to Canaan and declared the promised land. He made it clear, this is where your future generations will dwell. Yet a massive obstacle remained. The Canaanites already claimed this territory. It was heavily occupied. How could God hand this land over to Abram's future heirs? Abram did not question or complain. He simply built an altar and worshipped, fully trusting that God would keep his word. This altar was a bold public statement. Anyone passing by knew Abram served the one true Lord, rejecting the local pagan gods. As Abram settled in Canaan, God renewed his covenant with even bolder promises. Genesis 13, verses 14 through 17, captures this vital moment right after Lot departed. Look out from where you stand, gaze north, south, east, and west. All this land before you I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your descendants as countless as the dust of the earth. If someone could count the dust, only then could your offspring be numbered. Walk through the length and breadth of this territory, because I am giving it to you. God wanted Abram to see the vast scope of his inheritance. Every horizon he gazed upon would belong to his future family. His heirs would multiply like dust, completely beyond calculation. This was a breathtaking promise for a childless man. As the years slipped away, Abram naturally wondered how God would actually pull this off. Genesis 15, verses 1 through 3, captures his raw vulnerability. God spoke to him in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Abram. I am your shield, your ultimate reward." But Abram questioned, "Sovereign Lord, what good are your gifts if I remain childless? My entire estate will go to Eleazar of Damascus." Abram added, "You have given me no children, so a servant must inherit my house." He was just being realistic. Ancient custom dictated that without a son, the head servant inherited the estate. Eleazar was a loyal servant, but he was not the biological child God had promised. God answered with absolute clarity. Genesis 15, verses 4 and 5 records his decree. "This man will not inherit your estate. A son of your own flesh and blood will be your heir." Leading him outside, God said, "Look up at the heavens and count the stars if you can. That is how numerous your descendants will be." Standing under that infinite starry canopy, Abram listened to God's stunning vow that a biological son would carry his legacy. Genesis 15, verse 6 then reveals Abram's profound response to this promise. Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. This is key. He was not saved by rituals or good works. He was declared righteous purely because he trusted God's word. It was his faith, not his efforts, that pleased God. But God wanted to seal this. He initiated a formal covenant ceremony, instructing Abram to prepare a sacred sacrifice. Genesis 15, verses 9 and 10 details the setup. God commanded, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, plus a dove and a pigeon." Abram gathered them, split the animals down the middle, and lined up the halves opposite each other, though he left the birds whole. This was how ancient treaties were sealed. Both partners would walk between the severed animals, essentially saying, "May I suffer the fate of these beasts if I break my word." Then something supernatural unfolded. Genesis 15, verses 12, 17, and 18 records, "As the sun dipped, a heavy, terrifying darkness fell upon Abram as he drifted into a deep sleep. A smoking firepot and a blazing torch suddenly appeared, passing between the torn animal halves. That very day, God cut a covenant with Abram, I give this land to your descendants, from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates. Crucially, only God walked through. Abram slept, leaving God with sole responsibility. God was declaring, even if Abram fails, even if his descendants wander, I will keep my promise. The fiery symbols represented God's holy presence, walking the path alone. Years later, he would make this covenant even more deeply personal. Genesis 17, verses 3 through 5 captures their next encounter. Abram fell prostrate, and God declared, "My covenant is with you. You will father many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." This name change was a permanent seal. While Abram meant exalted father, Abraham meant father of multitudes. Every single time his name was spoken, he was reminded of God's destiny for him. He would father many nations, not just one. Yet years crept by, childless. Sarah, also renamed from Sarai, was now far too old to conceive. Despairing that the promise would ever flow through her, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Genesis 16:12 reveals Sarah's desperate plan. Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne no children, but she owned an Egyptian servant named Hagar. She pleaded with Abram, saying, "The Lord has kept me barren. Sleep with my servant. Perhaps we can build our family through her." Abram agreed to her proposal. In those days, this was standard cultural practice. If a wife remained childless, she could offer her maidservant to her husband, claiming the offspring as her own. Sarah thought this was the only way to realize God's covenant. But their human scheme triggered a nightmare of consequences. Genesis 16:45 details the aftermath. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. Once Hagar realized she was pregnant, she began treating her mistress with contempt. Sarai snapped at Abram. "This suffering is entirely your fault. I gave my servant to you, but now that she is pregnant, she looks down on me. Let God judge between us." Hagar's sudden pregnancy filled her with pride and disrespect towards Sarah. Resentment and fury consumed Sarah. Abraham was trapped right in the center of a bitter feud between his wife and his pregnant servant. Abraham's reaction was weak. Genesis 16 verse 6 records his words, "Your servant is in your hands. Do as you wish with her," Abram muttered. Sarah then mistreated Hagar so brutally that she fled into the harsh desert. Yet God watched over this helpless servant. Genesis 16 verses 7 to 11 reveals divine intervention. The angel of the Lord located Hagar beside a spring in the wilderness along the road to Shur. He asked Hagar, Sarai's servant, "Where did you come from, and where are you going?" "I am fleeing from my mistress," she replied. The angel of the Lord commanded her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." Then he promised, "I will multiply your descendants until they are far too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord continued, "You are carrying a child, and you will give birth to a son. You must name him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your cries of misery." God promised Hagar that her boy would also father a massive nation. The name Ishmael means God hears, reminding us that he heard her desperate plea. Genesis 16 verses 15 and 16 wraps up this chapter. Hagar gave Abram a son, and he named him Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old at his birth. He finally had a son. But this was not the child of God's covenant promise. Ishmael was the product of human manipulation, not God's miraculous intervention. Abraham truly loved Ishmael, likely assuming this was how the promise would unfold. But God had a different path. 13 long years passed. Abraham reached 99, while Sarah was 89. Biologically, having children was now an absolute impossibility. Yet, God appeared to Abraham once more with a mind-blowing revelation. Genesis chapter 17, verses 15 and 16 records God's words to Abraham. Your wife Sarai will no longer be called Sarai. Her name shall be Sarah. I will richly bless her and give you a son through her. She will be the mother of entire nations. Kings of dynasties will rise from her. Abraham fell face down in absolute shock, as recorded in Genesis 17:17. He laughed, asking himself, "Can a man who is 100 years old have a son? Will Sarah give birth at 90? He laughed out of sheer disbelief, not joy. The concept felt so absurd that laughter was his only response. He even begged God to let Ishmael be the promised heir, but God remained firm in his design. Genesis 17:19 records his reply. Yes, your wife Sarah will bear a son, and you must name him Isaac. I will establish an eternal covenant with him and his future descendants. Fittingly, the name Isaac literally means laughter, which was highly ironic given how both parents reacted to the promise. Later, 3 mysterious visitors arrived at Abraham's tent and repeated the prediction. Genesis 18:10 records, one of them said, I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was eavesdropping at the tent entrance behind him. Her response mirrored Abraham's skepticism. Genesis 18, verses 12 and 13, notes that Sarah laughed to herself, thinking, now that I am withered and my husband is old, will I really experience such joy? The Lord asked Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, and question if she could give birth in her old age. Terrified, when confronted, Sarah lied and denied it, but the visitor knew the truth. Genesis 18:14 poses one of Scripture's most profound questions. Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return at the set time next year, and Sarah will cradle a son. Just as God promised, she conceived, a miracle detailed in Genesis 21. The Lord stayed true to his word, showing grace and fulfilling his promise to Sarah. In his old age, Abraham watched his wife carry and bear their son. At the exact moment God foretold, Abraham named the newborn baby Isaac. This birth was a staggering miracle, defying Sarah's advanced age and the laws of nature. This child was born of divine power, proving absolutely nothing is impossible with God. Genesis 21 verses 6 and 7 captures her joy. Sarah rejoiced. God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears this will laugh with me. Who would have ever told Abraham that Sarah would nurse a child? Yet I have given him a son in his twilight years. The laughter of doubt had transformed into the pure laughter of wonder. God accomplished the impossible, leaving Sarah overflowing with joy. Isaac grew up cherished as the child of promise. He was everything his father had dreamed of. But then God demanded something that threatened to shatter every promise he had made. Genesis 22 records this ultimate trial. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. God called out Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your beloved son, your only son, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you. This was the ultimate test of Abraham's faith, demanding he sacrifice the very heir through whom all promises would be fulfilled. If Isaac died, how could he become the father of nations? How could Abraham's descendants ever outnumber the stars? Look closely at how God described Isaac. Your son, your only son, whom you love. God knew exactly what that boy meant to Abraham. This was no casual request. God was asking Abraham to surrender the absolute joy of his life. Yet Abraham's response is staggering. Genesis 22 verse 3 simply tells us, early the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey, and took 2 servants and his son Isaac. After chopping enough wood for the sacrifice, he set off toward the place God chose. No arguments, no hesitation, no delays. Rising at dawn, he prepared to obey God, even knowing it meant sacrificing his beloved son. This reveals the immense depth of his trust in God. The trek to Mount Moriah took 3 agonizing days. Imagine what was racing through Abraham's mind. Each step brought him closer to the moment of sacrifice. Every simple chat with his son must have broken his heart, knowing the dark path ahead. Upon reaching the mountain, Abraham prepared the altar. Genesis 22, verses 6 through 8 paints the scene. Abraham laid the wood for the offering onto the shoulders of his son Isaac, while he carried the torch and the sacrificial knife. As they walked side by side, Isaac looked up and spoke, asking, "Father." "Yes, my son," he replied. Isaac looked around. "We have the fire and the wood," he said, "but where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." With that, they kept walking. Isaac's innocent question must have absolutely shattered Abraham's heart, yet his response revealed profound faith. God will provide. He trusted that somehow the Almighty would make a way. On the mountain peak, Abraham constructed the altar and laid out the wood. Then came the agonizing climax. Genesis 22, verses 9 and 10 records their arrival. Abraham built the altar, stacked the wood, and then bound his young son, laying him gently on top of the pile. He drew the knife, raising his hand to sacrifice his own flesh and blood. He was actually going through with it. His beloved boy lay bound before him. With the blade high, he was ready to strike. This was no symbolic show. Abraham was completely committed to obeying the Lord, no matter how devastating the cost. At the final second, the heavens broke. Genesis 22, verses 11 and 12 captures this dramatic rescue. An angel of the Lord shouted from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Here I am," he answered. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the angel cried. "Do not hurt him. Now I see that you truly honor God, since you did not hold back your only son." God halted the blade just in time. This intense trial was over, and Abraham had passed beautifully. He proved he loved God above everything else on earth, even his own precious child. Genesis 22, verse 13 reveals God's ultimate provision. Looking up, Abraham spotted a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. He quickly freed the ram, offering it up on the altar in place of Isaac. Just as Abraham predicted, God provided the perfect substitute. The ram died so Isaac could live, showcasing God's mercy in response to such radical faith. Then God poured out an even greater promise. Genesis 22, verses 16 through 18, details God's solemn oath. "I swear by myself, says the Lord, because you did not withhold your only son, I will surely pour out my blessings on you. Your descendants will match the stars in the sky and the sands of the sea, conquering the gates of their enemies. Through your descendants, every nation on earth will find blessing, all because you listened to my voice." Following the intense drama on Mount Moriah, normal life resumed. But as years swept past, Sarah grew old and passed away. Genesis 23 records this heartbreaking loss. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She passed at Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron in Canaan, where Abraham wept and mourned for his beloved wife. What a remarkable life Sarah lived. She witnessed God's supernatural power at Isaac's birth and watched her miracle boy grow strong and resilient. She was woven into God's grand plan to bless humanity through Abraham's line. Now, however, Abraham faced a grim practical problem: where to bury his beloved. He was still a nomad in Canaan, owning not a single acre of the land God promised. That divine promise was for the future, not today. Genesis 23, verses 3 and 4 describes Abraham turning from his grief to speak with the local Hittites. "I am merely a traveler and stranger among you," he pleaded. "Sell me a plot of land so I can lay my wife to rest." Out of deep respect, the locals offered any tomb he wished. Yet Abraham insisted on paying the full price for a specific field that housed a cave. Genesis 23 verse 17 details the deed. Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, including the field, the cave, and every single tree within its borders, was legally deeded to Abraham. This occurred publicly in the presence of all the local elders at the city gate. This sacred cave became their family tomb. Eventually, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives would all find their final resting place here. This was the very first piece of the promised land Abraham actually owned. With Sarah gone, his focus shifted to finding a wife for Isaac. Determined to avoid local Canaanite women who worshipped pagan gods, Abraham took action. Genesis 24, verses 1 through 4, highlights his deep concern. Now well advanced in years, Abraham had been blessed by God in every way. He called his senior household servant, the man in charge of his estate, and gave him a solemn instruction. "Swear an oath by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not select a wife for my son from the pagan daughters of the Canaanites. Instead, travel back to my homeland, to my own relatives, to find a bride for my son Isaac." With that, Abraham sent his trusted servant on a massive journey back to Mesopotamia. Equipped with 10 camels packed with treasures and gifts, the servant set off to find Isaac's future bride. Arriving at the city of Abraham's family, the weary servant paused to pray for guidance. Genesis 24, verses 12 through 14, captures his humble plea. "O Lord God of my master Abraham, grant me success today and show unfailing loyalty to him. Look, I am standing here by this spring. Now the daughters of the local townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, 'Please lower your jar so I can drink,' and she replies, 'Drink, and I will water your camels too,' let her be the chosen wife for your servant Isaac." But before he even finished praying, a beautiful young woman named Rebekah arrived at the well. Genesis chapter 24, verses 18 to 20 describes what happened. She said, "Drink, my lord," and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After that she said, "I will draw water for your camels too, until they have had their fill." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and got enough for all of his camels. This was exactly what the servant had prayed for. Rebekah did not just offer him a drink. She volunteered to water all 10 camels, a massive task, showing her generous heart. When the servant learned that Rebekah was Abraham's great niece, he knew God had answered his prayer. After explaining his mission and receiving her family's blessing, Rebekah agreed to journey back with him to marry Isaac. Genesis chapter 24, verses 62 to 67 describes their meeting. Isaac was traveling from Beer Lahai Roi as he lived in the Negev. One evening he went out to the field to meditate. Looking up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up, saw Isaac, and quickly dismounted, asking the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" "He is my master," the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. After the servant explained everything, Isaac brought Rebekah into the tent of his mother Sarah, and she became his wife. He loved her deeply, finding comfort after his mother Sarah's death. But though Isaac and Rebekah were happy together, year after year passed with no children, just like his father Isaac had to wait and trust God's timing. Genesis chapter 25, verse 20 tells us Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Paddan Aram and sister of Laban. Isaac prayed earnestly to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his plea, and Rebekah became pregnant. But this was no ordinary pregnancy, as Genesis chapter 25 verse 22 describes. The babies struggled inside her, prompting her to ask, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to ask the Lord. With the babies fighting inside her womb, a deeply troubled Rebekah sought answers from God. His response, recorded in Genesis chapter 25 verse 23, was startling. The Lord told her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be divided. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." God was revealing that her twin boys would father two distinct nations, destined to always be in conflict. Even more surprising, the younger son would surpass the older, completely defying the cultural traditions of their time. When the twins finally arrived, they were polar opposites. Genesis chapter 25, verses 24 to 26, describes their birth. When the time came for her to give birth, she indeed had twin boys. The first to emerge was red, his entire body covered in hair like a garment, so they named him Esau. Right after his brother came out grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when his sons were born. Esau arrived first, covered in red hair, a trait reflected in his name. Jacob followed close behind, clutching Esau's heel as if trying to pull him back and claim first place. Jacob meant heel grabber or supplanter, meaning someone who takes another's place. As the boys grew up, their differences grew more obvious. Genesis chapter 25 verses 27 and 28 tells us the boys grew up and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open fields, while Jacob preferred staying quiet among the tents. Isaac, loving wild game, favored Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Esau loved the outdoors and the thrill of the hunt. Jacob preferred the quiet of home, reflecting a more thoughtful nature. Sadly, parental favoritism drove a wedge between them. This division would soon spark a shocking incident that changed their lives forever. Genesis chapter 25, verses 29 to 34 records the event. Once, while Jacob was cooking stew, Esau stumbled in from the wild, starving. He begged Jacob, "Quick, give me some of that red stew. I am starving." Jacob countered, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I am about to die." Esau said, "What good is a birthright to me?" But Jacob insisted, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob handed over the bread and lentil stew. Esau ate, drank, and simply walked away. He despised his birthright, which held immense spiritual and material value. As the firstborn, Esau was entitled to a double portion of the family estate and leadership of the clan after Isaac's death. Yet exhausted and hungry from the hunt, he traded it all for a bowl of stew, laying bare the starkly different values of the two brothers. Esau chased instant gratification, ignoring the future. Jacob, however, valued the spiritual inheritance and was willing to scheme to secure it. Years passed, and a frail, blind Isaac prepared to bestow the sacred firstborn blessing, a custom carrying immense spiritual weight. This blessing was far more than a simple wish. It held divine authority, shaping the ultimate destiny of both brothers. Genesis chapter 27, verses 1 to 4 describes Isaac's plan. When Isaac was old and his eyes could no longer see, he called his eldest son Esau, saying, "My son." "Here I am," Esau answered. Isaac said, "I am an old man now, and do not know when I will die. Take your gear, your quiver and bow, and go out into the wild to hunt game for me. Prepare the kind of savory food I love, and bring it to me, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Isaac desired his favorite feast before bestowing the blessing. However, Rebekah was listening, and she had a very different plan. Genesis chapter 27, verses 6 to 10 details her plot. Rebekah told Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father tell your brother Esau to bring him some wild game, and prepare a delicious meal so that he may bless him in the presence of the Lord before he dies. Now, my son, listen closely and do exactly as I say. Go to the flock and fetch me 2 of the finest young goats. I will prepare a delicious meal for your father, just the way he loves it. Then serve it to your father to eat, so he can give you his blessing before his time comes." Rebekah remembered God's promise that the older brother would serve the younger. Convinced Jacob deserved the blessing, she was willing to use lies and deception to make absolutely sure it happened. Jacob was terrified of getting caught. Genesis 27 verses 11 to 12 shows his anxiety. Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and my skin is smooth. What if my father touches me? I will seem like a trickster, bringing down a curse on myself instead of a blessing." But Rebekah had thought of everything. She covered Jacob's hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins to mimic Esau's hairiness. She dressed him in Esau's own clothes so he would smell like the outdoors. Then she handed him the meal and sent him to his father. The trick worked, but only just. Genesis 27 verses 21 to 23 describes the tense encounter. Isaac said to Jacob, "Come close so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you are truly my son Esau or not." Jacob stepped close to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are Esau's hands." Isaac failed to recognize him because his hands felt rough and hairy, just like his brother Esau's. So he blessed him. Isaac doubted the voice, but those hairy hands swept his suspicions away. Genesis 27, verses 27 to 29, records the blessing as Jacob drew near to kiss him. As Isaac caught the scent of his clothes, he blessed him, saying, "Look, the smell of my son is like the scent of a wild field blessed by the Lord. May God grant you the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, plenty of grain and fresh wine. May nations serve you, and may peoples bow before you. Rule over your brothers. May your mother's sons bow down before you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." Jacob had successfully stolen the firstborn's blessing, but absolute disaster struck almost immediately. Genesis 27, verses 30 to 32 records, "Just as Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had barely slipped away, Esau returned from the wild. He cooked up a savory meal and brought it to his father. He said, "Father, sit up and eat some of my wild game so you can give me your blessing." Shaken, his father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau." Instantly, the terrible truth emerged. Isaac realized he had been deceived, and Esau discovered his birthright blessing was gone. Genesis 27, verse 34, captures Esau's raw anguish. Hearing his father's words, he let out a devastating, bitter cry, pleading with his father, "Bless me too, my father." But the damage was done. In ancient times, a spoken blessing was binding and could never be recalled. Isaac could offer a secondary blessing, but the primary inheritance was gone forever. Consumed by rage, Esau began plotting his deadly revenge. Genesis 27, verse 41, reveals his dark intent. Esau harbored a deep grudge against Jacob over the stolen blessing, whispering to himself, "My father will die soon, and we will mourn him. After that, I will murder my brother, Jacob." Esau was playing the long game, waiting to strike. When Rebekah caught wind of the plot, she knew Jacob had to run. Genesis 27, verses 42 to 43, records her desperate warning after learning of Esau's threat. She sent for Jacob and warned him, "Your brother Esau is comforting himself with plans to murder you. Now my son, listen to me carefully and do as I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran." But Rebekah was cunning. Rather than telling Isaac their son was fleeing a murder plot, she manufactured a safer excuse for his departure. Genesis 27, verse 46, captures her complaint to Isaac. I am weary of my life because of these local Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of these local girls, a Hittite woman from around here, my life will not be worth living. It was a brilliant cover story. Isaac already feared Jacob might marry local women who worshipped pagan gods, repeating the very concern Abraham had for Isaac's own marriage. So Isaac summoned Jacob to give him travel orders and a final blessing, recorded in Genesis 28, verses 1 to 4. So Isaac called for Jacob, blessed him, and ordered, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go immediately to Padan Aram, to the household of your grandfather Bethuel. Find a wife there among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you, make you fruitful, and multiply your descendants until you become a great community of nations. May He grant you and your offspring the blessing of Abraham, so you can inherit this land where you now live as a stranger." This land God promised to Abraham. Isaac was passing on the sacred covenant. Despite the lies used to secure the blessing, Isaac realized that God's sovereign plan was for Jacob to lead the family and inherit Abraham's promises. And so Jacob left his home, running from a murderous brother, toward a completely unknown future in a strange land. He had secured both the birthright and the blessing, but now he had to pay a terrible price, leaving behind everyone and everything he loved. He had no idea if he would ever return. He departed with nothing but the clothes on his back and his father's blessing. Fleeing for his life, he journeyed toward Haran, where his uncle Laban lived, hundreds of miles away. Walking completely alone through the barren wilderness, he surely questioned his choices. He won the blessing, but at what cost? Yet on that very first lonely night, something absolutely incredible happened. Genesis 28, verses 10 to 11 tells us, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. Reaching a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking a stone from that place, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Jacob was entirely alone, resting his head on a cold rock. No tent, no servants, no comfort. Just the hard, dusty ground and the vast night sky. He likely felt abandoned and deeply afraid, dreading what lay ahead. But God met him in that desolate place. Genesis 28, verses 12 to 15, describes his legendary dream. He dreamed of a stairway resting on the earth, its top reaching to heaven, with angels of God ascending and descending on it. Above it stood the Lord, saying, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give this land where you lie to you and your descendants. Your offspring will be as countless as the dust of the earth. You will spread out to the west and the east, the north and the south. Every family on earth will find blessing through you and your descendants. I am with you and will guard you wherever you travel, and I will lead you back to this ground. I will never abandon you until I fulfill everything I promised." What an incredible sight that must have been. A massive stairway stretching from earth to heaven, with angels constantly ascending and descending. And at the summit, God Himself spoke words of comfort and promise to this terrified young runaway. He was confirming that despite Jacob's dishonesty, the sacred covenant promises given to Abraham and Isaac now belonged to him. This land was his. His family line would be infinite. All nations would find blessing through his family. And most of all, God would be by his side. When Jacob finally awoke, he was completely overwhelmed by the vision. Genesis 28, verses 16 and 17 reveals his reaction. Waking up, Jacob thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not even know it." Filled with awe, he said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God and the gateway to heaven." Jacob realized he had stood in the presence of the Almighty without knowing it. The spot that felt so lonely and ordinary was actually holy ground. God was not confined to temples. He was everywhere, even in the wilderness. Genesis 28 shows what Jacob did next. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had used as a pillow, set it up as a sacred pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He named that place Bethel, though the city was originally called Luz. Jacob turned his stone pillar into a monument marking where God spoke. Bethel means house of God, yet Jacob still wanted a guarantee that God would keep his promises. Genesis 28 records his vow. Jacob made a solemn promise, saying, "If God will be with me and protect me on this journey, and will provide food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone I set up as a pillar will be God's house. Of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth." Jacob was negotiating a deal with God. If God kept him safe and brought him home, only then would Jacob serve him and offer a tenth of his wealth back. This shows how much Jacob still had to learn about true faith. He was treating the Almighty like a business partner instead of the sovereign Lord of the universe. With renewed hope, Jacob continued his journey toward Haran. Arriving in his mother's homeland, he paused at a well where local shepherds gathered to water their flocks. Genesis 29 describes the scene. Out in the open fields, he spotted a well with 3 flocks of sheep resting nearby, waiting to be watered. A massive stone covered the mouth of the well. Only when all the flocks had assembled would the shepherds roll the heavy stone away to water the sheep. Afterward, they would slide the stone back over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds if they knew Laban. They replied that Laban's daughter, Rachel, was already on her way with the sheep. Genesis 29 tells of their first meeting. As Jacob spoke with them, Rachel arrived with her father's sheep, working as a shepherdess. When Jacob saw her, this beautiful daughter of his uncle Laban, he immediately stepped forward, rolled the heavy stone away from the well, and watered his uncle's flock. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Overjoyed to meet his cousin, he had single-handedly rolled away a stone that normally required several men to budge. He was showing off his strength, desperate to impress this beautiful young woman. Once he revealed his identity, she ran to tell her family. Laban welcomed Jacob with open arms and invited him to stay. Genesis 29 records Laban's words, "You are my own flesh and blood." Jacob stayed with him for a whole month, working tirelessly in the fields and helping with the flocks. Laban was highly impressed by his dedication. He wanted to formalize their working arrangement. Genesis 29 reveals Laban's generous offer. Laban told Jacob, "Just because you are family does not mean you should work for free. Tell me what your wages should be." Here is where the story gets fascinating. Laban had 2 daughters, Leah the older and Rachel the younger. Genesis 29 describes them. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older was Leah, and the younger was Rachel. Leah had delicate, weak eyes, but Rachel was breathtakingly beautiful. Jacob had fallen deeply in love with Rachel at first sight. Genesis 29 records his proposal. Jacob, deeply in love, offered, "I will work for you 7 years in exchange for your younger daughter Rachel." 7 years was an incredibly long time to work just to marry someone. Most men paid a bride price, but Jacob had arrived completely empty-handed. He was willing to give 7 years of his life for the woman he adored. Laban agreed, and Jacob began his long years of labor. Genesis 29 shows how love made the time fly. Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, yet they felt like only a few days because of his deep love for her. Once those 7 years ended, Jacob was ready to claim his bride. Genesis 29 shows his eagerness. Jacob demanded of Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is finished, and I want to marry her." Laban then prepared a grand wedding feast, inviting the entire community to celebrate. But the host had a deceptive plan that would change everything. On the wedding night, a shocking betrayal unfolded, as Genesis 29 describes. When darkness fell, Laban took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob's tent instead, and Laban gave his servant Zilpah to Leah as her maid. When morning came, there was Leah. Devastated, Jacob confronted Laban. "What have you done to me? I served you for Rachel. Why did you trick me?" Jacob had been utterly fooled. In the pitch-black confusion of the wedding night, Laban had secretly substituted Leah for Rachel. The man who once tricked his own father to steal his brother's blessing was now the victim of deception himself. Genesis 29 records Laban's clever excuse. Laban shrugged, saying, "Our custom forbids marrying off the younger sister before the older one." That might have been true, but Laban should have shared that crucial detail 7 years earlier, when Jacob first asked for Rachel. Instead, he let Jacob labor for 7 long years under false pretenses. But Laban had a scheme that helped only himself. Genesis chapter 29 details his greedy proposal. "Finish this daughter's bridal week." Laban bargained, "And then we will give you the younger sister too, in exchange for 7 more years of work." So Jacob complied. He finished Leah's week, and Laban gave him Rachel. Jacob now had 2 wives, a recipe for absolute chaos that would plague him forever. And he still owed Laban 7 more years of hard labor for Rachel. That meant spending 14 years of his life just to marry his true love. The household was a war zone right from the start. Genesis chapter 29 describes the painful reality. Jacob loved Rachel far more than Leah, and he spent another 7 years working for her father to pay his debt. When the Lord saw Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel remained barren. Still, Jacob openly favored Rachel over her sister. Everyone knew Leah was unwanted, but God saw her aching heart and blessed her with children while her sister waited. Leah's first 4 sons arrived in rapid succession. Each birth was a desperate cry for her husband's affection. Genesis chapter 29, verses 32 to 35 records their names. When Leah bore her first son, she named him Reuben, crying, "The Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Soon she was pregnant again, and when she gave birth to another son, she said, "Because the Lord heard I am unloved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. For a 3rd time she conceived. When her son was born, she pleaded, "Now surely my husband will hold me close, because I have given him 3 sons." So he was named Levi. But when she conceived again and bore a 4th son, she declared, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah. Then she stopped having children. Every name revealed Leah's deep heartbreak. Reuben meant, "Behold a son." She desperately hoped Jacob would love her now that she had produced an heir. Simeon meant, "He hears," because God heard her pain. Levi meant attached, hoping her husband would finally draw close. Then came Judah. His name meant praise. Leah finally found a moment of peace, shifting her focus to worshiping God rather than begging for her husband's affection. Meanwhile, Rachel remained barren, and her jealousy burned out of control. Scripture reveals her desperation when she realized she could not give Jacob any children. Resentful of her sister, she demanded of Jacob, "Give me children, or I will die." This desperate ultimatum infuriated him, and Scripture records his sharp response. Jacob snapped back, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from bearing fruit?" Frustrated and unable to conceive, Rachel decided to copy the scheme Sarah used with Hagar. The Bible describes her desperate solution. She said, "Here is Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so she can bear children for me, and I can build a family through her." So she handed her servant Bilhah over as a wife. Jacob complied. Bilhah became pregnant and would bear him 2 sons. Scripture tells us that Bilhah conceived and gave Jacob a son. Rachel rejoiced, saying, "God has vindicated me. He heard my plea and finally gave me a son." For this reason, she named the boy Dan. Bilhah conceived again, giving Jacob a 2nd son. Rachel boasted, "I have had a fierce struggle with my sister, and I have won." So she named him Imnali. Dan meant judge or vindicate. Rachel believed God had ruled in her favor. Naphtali meant struggle, and she felt she was finally winning this bitter sibling rivalry. But Leah refused to lose. Realizing her own childbearing had paused, she decided to deploy her servant as well. Genesis chapter 30 describes her retaliation. Seeing that she had stopped conceiving, Leah gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob as a wife. Zilpah then bore Jacob a son. Leah declared, "What great fortune," and named him Gad. Then Zilpah bore a 2nd son. Genesis chapter 30 verses 12 and 13 records the birth. Leah cheered, "How happy I am! Women will call me blessed." So she named him Asher. Gad meant good fortune, and Asher meant happy. Leah tried to act blessed and joyful, though she was still deeply unloved. This toxic sisterly rivalry reached a bizarre climax over mandrakes plants, thought to boost fertility. Genesis chapter 30 describes the incident. During the wheat harvest, Reuben found mandrake plants in the fields and brought them to his mother, Leah. Rachel begged her, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But Leah snapped, "Wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Fine," Rachel countered. "He can sleep with you tonight in exchange for the mandrakes." The sisters were literally bargaining for a night with their shared husband. This shows how broken their family had become under polygamy and favoritism. That night, Leah conceived again, eventually bearing 2 more sons and a daughter. Genesis chapter 30 records these births. God answered Leah's prayers, and she became pregnant with Jacob's 5th son. Leah declared, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband." So she named him Issachar. Then she conceived once more and bore a 6th son. Leah said, "God has given me a precious gift. Surely my husband will honor me now that I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun. Later, she gave birth to a daughter named Dinah. Issachar meant reward, and Zebulun meant honor. Leah was still desperately hoping Jacob would finally respect her. Finally, God remembered Rachel's deep longing. Genesis chapter 30, verses 22 to 24 describes this answered prayer. God remembered Rachel, heard her pleas, and opened her womb. She gave birth to a son and declared, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph, praying, "May the Lord give me another son." Joseph meant, "May he add." Rachel was thrilled, yet she immediately craved another child. Born to Jacob's favorite wife, this boy would become the favored son, planting the seeds for massive family conflict down the road. Jacob now had 11 sons and 1 daughter by 4 different women. These 12 sons would form the 12 tribes of Israel, yet their births were plagued by jealousy, rivalry, and dysfunction. Once Joseph was born, Jacob felt the pull of home. He had finally paid his debt of labor to Laban. He yearned to take his family back to the promised land. Genesis chapter 30 records his bold request. Right after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob confronted Laban. "Send me home to my own land," he demanded. "Give me my wives and children I worked so hard for, and let me go. You know how faithfully I have worked for you." But Laban could not bear to lose him. Jacob brought success to everything he touched, making Laban a very wealthy man. Genesis chapter 30 records the uncle's desperate plea. "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay with me. I have learned that the Lord has blessed me purely because of you." So Jacob agreed to stay. But first, he negotiated a deal to build his own wealth. Genesis chapter 30 describes the arrangement. Laban asked, "What should I pay you?" "Do not pay me anything," Jacob replied. "Just do this one thing, and I will keep minding your sheep. Let me go through the flocks today and separate every speckled or spotted lamb, along with every spotted goat. That is all I ask for my wages." This seemed like a steal to Laban, since most livestock was solid-colored. But Jacob had a secret strategy. Using clever breeding techniques, he produced a massive wave of spotted animals. Genesis chapter 30 tells us the remarkable outcome. In this way, Jacob grew incredibly wealthy, owning vast flocks, male and female servants, camels, and donkeys. Soon, Laban's sons began grumbling that Jacob was getting rich at their expense. Genesis chapter 31 describes this rising tension. Jacob heard them whispering, "He has taken everything our father owned. He built his entire fortune on our family inheritance." Jacob also noticed Laban's cold, changing attitude toward him. That is when God spoke, telling him it was time to go. Genesis chapter 31 records the Lord's command, "Go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will be with you." Jacob chose to slip away quietly while Laban was off shearing sheep. Genesis chapter 31 describes their escape. Jacob loaded his wives and children onto camels, driving his massive herds ahead of them. Carrying everything he had acquired in Padan Aram, he set out for his father Isaac in Canaan. 3 days into their journey, Laban finally realized they were gone. He gathered his kinsmen and gave chase. He was furious, ready to fight. But God warned Laban in a dream not to touch Jacob before he finally caught up. Laban accused Jacob of fleeing like a thief and carrying off his daughters like prisoners. But Jacob stood his ground, reminding him of 20 years of loyal service. Genesis chapter 31 captures Jacob's deep frustration. "I have served you for 20 years. Your livestock never miscarried, and I never ate a single ram from your flocks. If wild beasts tore an animal, I did not make you pay. I bore the loss myself, even when thieves stole from us day or night. I endured scorching heat by day and freezing cold by night, and sleep fled from my eyes." After tense arguments, they finally made a covenant of peace. They raised a stone pillar to prove that neither would harm the other. Genesis chapter 31 records their solemn vow. It was called Mizpah because he said, "May the Lord keep watch between us when we are out of each other's sight." With that conflict settled, Jacob headed home. But now an even bigger threat loomed ahead. His brother, Esau, who had sworn to kill him 20 years ago. Terrified as he drew near Esau's territory, Jacob sent messengers ahead to announce his arrival, hoping to beg for peace. But they returned with terrifying news. Genesis chapter 32 records their chilling report. When they reached Jacob, they said, "We saw your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you with 400 men." 400 men? This was a war party, not a welcome home. Jacob panicked. Genesis chapter 32 describes his sheer panic. Overwhelmed by fear, Jacob split his people's flocks, herds, and camels into 2 separate camps. It was a simple strategy. If Esau attacked one camp, the other might survive. But then he did something far more powerful. He prayed. Genesis chapter 32 records his desperate cry. "O God of my grandfather Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you told me to return to my own land and relatives, promising to bless me. I am completely unworthy of all the mercy and faithfulness you have shown me. I owned nothing but a walking staff when I crossed the Jordan River, but now I lead 2 massive camps. Save me, I beg you, from Esau. I am terrified that he will attack us all, destroying even the mothers and their children. But you promised, I will make you prosper and multiply your descendants like the sand of the seashore, too numerous to count." This raw prayer shows Jacob admitting his deepest fears and claiming God's promise. Next, he put together a massive peace offering for Esau, hundreds of goats, sheep, camels, and cattle, and donkeys. He sent them ahead in waves to soften Esau's heart. After sending his family across the Jabbok River, Jacob remained entirely alone in the darkness. That night, the most defining moment of his life unfolded. Genesis chapter 32 describes this mysterious encounter. Jacob was left alone, and a mysterious man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. Realizing he could not overpower Jacob, the stranger struck the socket of Jacob's hip, wrenching it out of joint. Still, the struggle continued. The man demanded, "Let me go! Dawn is breaking!" But Jacob cried out, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." They had fought all night. This opponent was powerful enough to dislocate Jacob's hip with a single touch, revealing he was far more than a mere human. Yet Jacob refused to let go, even through the agonizing pain. He held on with desperate faith, demanding a blessing. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. Genesis chapter 32 records this divine transformation. The stranger asked, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he replied. The man declared, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have overcome." God changed Jacob's name to Israel, meaning he struggles with God. The mysterious opponent he had wrestled with all night was actually God himself, standing there in human form. Jacob had literally wrestled God all night, prevailing through stubborn faith. Genesis chapter 32, verses 29 through 31, concludes this wild encounter. Jacob pleaded, "Tell me your name." But the stranger replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life was spared." As the sun rose over Peniel, Jacob walked away with a limp, his hip wounded from the fight. Peniel meant face of God. Jacob had looked upon the Almighty and survived, yet he would carry a permanent physical reminder of this divine clash, a limp that would mark him forever. This midnight wrestling match was far more than physical. It was the ultimate turning point in Jacob's spiritual journey. He had spent his entire life fighting his brother in the womb, fighting Esau for the blessing, and fighting Laban for his family and wealth. But now he had struggled with God and came out transformed. He was no longer Jacob the deceiver, but Israel, the one who prevailed with God. When Jacob finally faced Esau, the reunion was deeply emotional and peaceful. The brothers wept in each other's arms, with no trace of the deadly grudge from 20 years ago. Jacob settled near the land of Shechem, buying property and building a sacred altar. Yet living among the Canaanites soon brought fresh dangers to his household. Genesis chapter 34, verses 1 and 2 records a heartbreaking event. Dinah, the daughter of Leah bore to Jacob, went out to socialize with the local women. When Shem, son of Hamor, the Hivite ruler of that region, laid eyes on her, he took her by force. Dinah was likely just a teenager when this tragedy struck. Shem, the prince's son, had violated her. This was far more than a personal crime. It shattered the honor of Jacob's entire family. Yet, in the darkness, a strange twist was coming. Genesis chapter 34, verses 3 and 4 reveals, "His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. Shem pleaded with his father Hamor to get him this girl as his wife. Shockingly, Shem had fallen in love with Dinah after the assault and now demanded her hand. His father, Hamor, approached Jacob to arrange a marriage, acting as if nothing had happened. But when Jacob's sons learned of their sister's pain, a fierce anger consumed them. Genesis chapter 34, verse 7 describes their fury. Jacob's sons rushed back from the fields the moment they heard the devastating news of what had happened. They were deeply grieved and angry. Shechem had committed a disgraceful act against Israel by violating Jacob's daughter, a sin that should never have been tolerated. Jacob's sons feigned agreement, hiding a deadly trap. Genesis chapter 34, verses 14 through 16, records the deceptive terms they offered. They insisted, "We cannot do this. Giving our sister to an uncircumcised man would bring deep shame and disgrace upon our entire family. We will only agree to this covenant on one condition. You must become like us by circumcising every male. Only then will we give you our daughters and take yours for ourselves. We will settle here and become one people with you." Eagerly, Hamor and Shem agreed to their terms. They talked every man in town into getting circumcised, dangling the promise of wealthy trade and alliances with Jacob's rich family. But Jacob's sons planned a cold betrayal. Genesis chapter 34 describes the terrifying, bloody revenge they took instead. 3 days later, while the men writhed in pain, Dinah's brothers, Simeon and Levi, unsheathed their swords, stormed the helpless city, and slaughtered every single man. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword, dragged Dinah out of Shechem's house, and quickly fled. Trapped in their healing agony and unable to fight back, the helpless townspeople were completely wiped out by Simeon and Levi. The other brothers then pillaged the ruins, taking women and children captive. Jacob watched in sheer horror his terror, detailed in Genesis chapter 34, verse 30. Jacob confronted Simeon and Levi, crying out that they had brought ruin by making his name a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites living nearby. "We are so few. If those tribes unite and strike us, my entire household will be completely wiped from the earth." Jacob dreaded a brutal counterattack from neighboring clans. His sons had painted a massive target on their backs. Yet Simeon and Levi felt absolutely no remorse. Genesis chapter 34, verse 31, records their cold reply. "Should he have treated our sister like a harlot?" This dark moment exposed the deep fractures within Jacob's household. The brothers possessed a savage streak, triggered whenever their pride was wounded. The toxic favoritism and family dysfunction of their youth kept breeding endless heartbreak and strife. Fleeing the disaster, Jacob packed up his family and left Shechem. Soon, God appeared again, reaffirming his new name and the sacred covenant. Genesis chapter 35, verse 11 records God's voice. "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A great nation, even a vast assembly of nations, will descend from you, and kings will rise from your lineage. The very land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I now give to you and your future descendants." Yet devastating heartbreak struck when Jacob's beloved Rachel died while giving birth to her second baby boy. Genesis chapter 35 describes her tragic passing. They packed up and journeyed on from Bethel. A short distance from Ephrath, Rachel went into an agonizing, complicated labor. As she struggled terribly in the throes of childbirth, the midwife tried to comfort her. "Do not fear, for you have another son." With her very last breath, she named him Ben-Oni, but his grieving father called him Benjamin instead. She passed away giving life to Benjamin, which means, "son of my right hand." Though her dying wish was to name him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, Jacob chose a name of hope. Jacob now had 12 sons, yet his blinding favoritism fueled fresh disaster. Genesis chapter 37 reveals the bitter truth. Israel loved Joseph far more than his other boys, since he was the child of his old age, gifting him a beautifully woven, ornate robe. Seeing this blatant favoritism, his brothers began to deeply despise Joseph, refusing to even speak a kind word to him. Joseph was, after all, the firstborn of his beloved Rachel, given to Jacob in his twilight years. Jacob never even tried to hide his favoritism. That legendary coat of many colors was a glaring public display of his undivided love. It was a royal robe, a coat meant for someone who never worked a day in the fields. His brothers already despised him for being their father's favorite, but then Joseph fueled the fire by sharing his dreams. Genesis 37 verses 5 through 8 describes this first dream. When Joseph told his brothers what he saw, their hatred grew even deeper. He told them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain in the field, when suddenly my bundle stood straight up while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers snapped back. "Do you actually think you will rule over us? Will you really govern us?" And they hated him even more because of what he said. The dream of the bowing grain was a clear sign that they would one day serve him. This was the absolute last thing his brothers wanted to hear from their father's golden child. But Joseph had another, even more provocative dream. As Genesis 37 verses 9 through 11 reveals, he told his brothers, "Listen, I had another dream. In this one, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were all bowing down before me." When he shared this with his father, Jacob rebuked him. "What kind of dream is this?" he asked. "Will your mother, your brothers, and I really bow to the ground before you?" His brothers burned with jealousy, but his father kept thinking about it. In this second vision, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed to Joseph, representing his father, mother, and 11 brothers bowing before him. Even Jacob was deeply unsettled by this vision, though he wondered if it came from God. At only 17, Joseph lacked the wisdom to keep quiet. He likely shared his dreams innocently, never realizing how much they would enrage his brothers. Yet God was already revealing his plan for Joseph's future, even though it would take years of intense suffering before those dreams became reality. The stage was set for a massive shift in the story of God's people. This sibling hatred would soon trigger events that altered the course of history, pulling the family of Israel down to Egypt and setting the stage for what would ultimately lead to the Exodus and the birth of a brand new nation. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers tending sheep in Dothan. When they saw him approaching in that infamous royal robe, their long brewing rage finally boiled over. Genesis 37 verses 18 to 20 records their dark conspiracy. Spotting him from afar before he even arrived, they plotted to murder him. "Look, here comes that dreamer," they whispered to one another. "Come on, let us kill him, throw him into a cistern, and say a wild beast devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben tried to save his life. He suggested throwing him into a dry cistern instead of shedding blood, secretly planning to rescue him later. When Joseph finally arrived, his brothers ripped away his beautiful robe and threw him into the empty cistern. As they sat down to eat, a caravan of Ishmaelites appeared, heading toward Egypt. Judah proposed a solution that spared Joseph's life. Genesis 37, verses 26 and 27 details his plan. Judah asked them, "What do we gain by killing our brother and covering up his blood? Let us sell him to these Ishmaelites instead of hurting him. After all, he is our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed, and they sold Joseph to the merchants for 20 shekels of silver. Genesis 37 verse 28 records this deal. When the Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph from a cistern and sold him for 20 silver shekels to the Ishmaelites heading for Egypt. To cover their tracks, they slaughtered a goat and soaked his famous robe in blood. They brought the blood-soaked robe to their father, letting him believe the worst. Genesis 37, verses 32 through 35, describes Jacob's agony. They showed the ruined coat to their father and said, "We found this. Take a look and see if it belongs to your son." He recognized it instantly and cried, "It is my son's robe. A wild animal must have torn him to pieces." Joseph is gone. Jacob tore his clothes in grief, wrapped himself in sackcloth, and mourned his son for many days. His children tried to comfort him, but he refused to be consoled. "I will go to my grave still mourning my son," he sobbed. Meanwhile, Joseph was being taken down to Egypt, sold into a life of slavery, bought by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. In a single day, he went from favored son to foreign slave. Though trapped in a foreign land, Joseph did not lose hope. Genesis 39, verses 2 through 4, reveals how God blessed his life. The Lord was with Joseph, causing him to succeed while living in the house of his master. When Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him, bringing success to everything he did, Joseph found great favor in his eyes. Potiphar made him his personal attendant, putting him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. Joseph's integrity and skill were so clear that Potiphar promoted him to manage his entire estate. Genesis 39 verses 5 and 6 highlights this authority. From the moment Joseph took charge, the Lord blessed the entire Egyptian household for Joseph's sake. God's blessing rested on everything Potiphar owned, both inside the house and out in the fields. So Potiphar left everything in Joseph's hands. He didn't worry about a single thing except deciding what he wanted to eat. But success brought temptation. Joseph was exceptionally handsome, and Potiphar's wife noticed. Genesis 39 verse 7 describes her offer. Eventually his master's wife cornered him and demanded sleep with me. But Joseph firmly refused her repeated advances, explaining his reasons in Genesis 39 verses 8 and 9. "With me here," he told her, "my master doesn't worry about anything in this household. He has trusted me with everything he owns. No one here is greater than I am, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Joseph's refusal stood on three deep principles. He was loyal to his master-honored marriage and feared God. Though exiled and far from home, with no one watching, Joseph refused to compromise his faith. Day after day, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph. When persistence failed, she cornered him and forced herself on him. Genesis 39 verses 11 to 12 describes the trap. One day he went inside to do his chores with no other servants around. She grabbed his cloak, demanding he sleep with her. But Joseph tore away, leaving his coat behind, and bolted outside. Humiliated and furious, Potiphar's wife vowed to destroy him. Using his cloak as fake evidence, she accused him of assault. Genesis 39 verses 17 to 18 records her twisted story. "That Hebrew slave you brought home tried to abuse me, but the moment I screamed for help, he panicked, left his cloak behind, and fled the house." Potiphar believed her lie and threw Joseph into a dungeon. Genesis 39 verse 20 says, "Joseph was locked away where the king's prisoners were kept. Yet even in the dark depths of that prison, the Lord stayed with Joseph and showed him constant mercy." Seeing Joseph's integrity and leadership, the warden soon put him in charge of the entire prison. There, Joseph met two fallen officials, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, both locked up for offending the king. One night, both men had haunting dreams they could not decipher. Genesis chapter 40, verses 6 to 8, describes how deeply troubled they looked when Joseph checked on them. He asked Pharaoh's officers, "Why do you look so miserable today?" "We both had vivid dreams," they replied, "but there is nobody here who can tell us what they mean." Joseph looked at them and said, "Do not dream interpretations belong to God alone? Go ahead, tell me." The cupbearer went first. He dreamed of a vine with 3 branches that quickly bloomed into ripe grapes. He squeezed them directly into Pharaoh's cup and handed it to the king. Joseph had good news. In 3 days, the cupbearer would get his job back. But the baker's dream was a different story. He carried 3 baskets of bread on his head, but birds kept eating from the top basket. Joseph's message was grim. Within 3 days, the baker would be executed. Both fates unfolded exactly as Joseph predicted, as Genesis 40 verses 20 to 22 confirms. 3 days later, Pharaoh threw a massive birthday feast for his court. He summoned both the chief cupbearer and the chief baker from prison before all his officials. He restored the cupbearer to his post, putting the cup back in Pharaoh's hand. But he executed the baker, hanging him on a tree, just as Joseph had warned. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph begged him for a favor. Genesis 40 verses 14 to 15 records his desperate plea. When things go well for you, please remember me and show mercy. Speak to Pharaoh so I can escape this place. I was stolen from my homeland, and I did nothing to deserve this dark cell. But Genesis chapter 40 verse 23 reveals the heartbreaking outcome. The cupbearer completely forgot about Joseph. He was left behind, rotting in that prison for 2 more long years, forgotten by the very man he helped rescue. But 2 years later, everything changed. Pharaoh began having terrifying dreams that baffled Egypt's wisest minds. First, he saw 7 fat cows eaten alive by 7 gaunt, sickly cows. Next, 7 healthy ears of grain were swallowed by 7 scorched, thin ears. Finally, the cupbearer remembered. Genesis 41 verses 9 to 13 records his confession. The cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "I must confess my failures today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants years ago, he threw me and the chief baker into the captain's guardhouse. We both had dreams on the very same night, and each dream had its own meaning. A young Hebrew slave was with us, a servant of the guard captain. We told him our dreams, and he explained exactly what they meant. Everything happened just as he predicted." Hearing this, Pharaoh instantly summoned Joseph. They rushed him from the dungeon, shaved him, changed his clothes, and brought him before the most powerful ruler on earth. Genesis 41 verses 15 to 16 captures their exchange as Pharaoh demanded answers. "I had a dream," Pharaoh said, "and no one can explain it. But I hear you can decode any dream you hear." "I cannot do it," Joseph answered. But God will give Pharaoh a peace-filled answer. Standing before royalty, Joseph humbly gave all credit to God, instead of taking credit for himself. After listening closely, Joseph delivered the revelation. Pharaoh's 2 dreams share the exact same meaning. God is showing Pharaoh what lies ahead. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 ripe heads of grain represent 7 years. It is the same single message. The 7 ugly gaunt cows represent another 7 years, as do the 7 ruined hollow heads of grain, scorched by the desert wind. These predict 7 years of devastating famine. First, Egypt will experience 7 years of incredible wealth, then 7 years of starvation. But Joseph went further. He offered a plan. Genesis 41 verse 33 records his advice. Pharaoh must find a highly wise and discerning man to govern the nation. Appoint dedicated overseers to collect 1/5 of the entire harvest of Egypt during these 7 golden, abundant years. Gather all the excess food from the prosperous years ahead and stockpile grain in the cities, guarded under Pharaoh's personal authority to use when the drought strikes. This food will act as a critical reserve during the 7 years of famine that are coming to Egypt, saving the nation from complete and utter ruin. Amazed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh immediately promoted the former slave to second in command over Egypt. Genesis 41 verses 39 to 41 describes this incredible promotion. Pharaoh told Joseph, "Since God has revealed all of this to you, no one is as wise or discerning as you. You will govern my palace, and my entire nation must obey your direct commands. Only I on the throne will be greater than you." Pharaoh then declared to Joseph, "I now place you in charge of all Egypt." Overnight, Joseph rose from a cold dungeon to prime minister. Pharaoh gave him his signet ring, clothed him in fine linen, and draped a gold chain around his neck. At age 30, the Hebrew slave became the most powerful leader in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. During the 7 prosperous years, Joseph gathered and stored grain across Egypt. Genesis chapter 41, verses 47 through 49, describes the massive harvest. Throughout those 7 years of plenty, the ground yielded massive crops. Joseph gathered all the surplus food in Egypt and stored it safely inside the fortified cities. In every city, he stockpiled the food harvested from the surrounding fields. Joseph piled up grain like the endless sands of the sea. There was so much that he finally stopped keeping records because it was simply beyond measure. During this golden age, Joseph married Asenath, daughter of an Egyptian priest, and had 2 sons. Genesis 41, verses 50 to 52, details his family. Before the years of starvation arrived, Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, bore Joseph 2 sons. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, declaring, "God has made me forget all my hardships and my father's entire household." He named his second son Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in this land of my grief." These names mirrored Joseph's deep emotional healing. Manasseh literally meant making one forget. God helped him heal from the trauma of his brother's betrayal. Ephraim meant fruitful, a sign that God had blessed him in a foreign land. Once the 7 bountiful years ended, the famine struck exactly as Joseph predicted. Genesis chapter 41, verses 54 to 57, describes its severity. The 7 devastating years of famine arrived just as Joseph foretold. While starvation gripped every neighboring nation, Egypt remained the only place with food. As the famine finally tightened its grip on Egypt, the desperate people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh simply told them, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he says." With starvation sweeping across the entire land, Joseph unlocked the massive storehouses and began selling grain to the Egyptians as the crisis grew worse by the day. Soon, people from all over the world traveled to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the terrible drought spared absolutely no one. The disaster struck the surrounding regions hard, including Canaan, where Jacob and his family lived. Egypt was now their only hope for survival. Hearing that food was available in Egypt, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to buy grain. He kept Benjamin at home, terrified of losing the only remaining son of his beloved Rachel. Genesis chapter 42, verses 3 to 6, describes their arrival as 10 of Joseph's brothers journeyed to Egypt for food. But Jacob refused to send Joseph's full brother Benjamin, fearing that some tragic accident might befall him on the road. Thus, Israel's sons joined the desperate crowds seeking food for the famine-gripped Canaan too. Meanwhile, Joseph ruled as governor, directly controlling the distribution of grain to all foreign buyers. When his brothers arrived, they bowed low, pressing their faces into the dirt. The prophetic dreams Joseph had as a 17-year-old boy were finally coming true. They prostrated themselves before him, completely oblivious to his identity. 20 long years had passed. Clad in royal Egyptian robes, they assumed he was long dead. Joseph recognized them instantly, but chose to test their hearts before showing who he was. Genesis chapter 42, verses 7 to 9, reveals his clever strategy. Joseph knew who they were, but acted like a harsh stranger, demanding, "Where do you come from?" "From the land of Canaan, just to buy food," they replied. Suddenly remembering his old dreams, Joseph barked back, "You are spies." Joseph charged them with espionage and demanded they prove their innocence. He demanded one brother fetch Benjamin, while the rest sat in prison. After 3 days, he relented slightly. Only one would stay locked up, while the others took grain home. But they had to bring Benjamin back to prove their honesty. Terrified, they whispered to each other in Hebrew, completely unaware that Joseph understood every word. Genesis chapter 42, verses 21 and 22 records their guilt. They muttered, "We are paying for what we did to our brother. We saw his sheer terror when he begged us for mercy, but we shut our ears. That is why this nightmare has found us." Reuben cried out, "Did I not warn you not to harm the boy? But you would not listen. Now his blood is on our hands." Hearing their raw remorse after all these years, Joseph had to slip away to weep. Their crushing guilt had haunted them for 2 decades. Holding Simeon hostage, Joseph sent the rest home with grain, while secretly slipping their payment back into their sacks. When the brothers recounted the ordeal, Jacob was absolutely devastated. Genesis chapter 42, verse 36 highlights his deep sorrow. Their father cried, "You are stripping me of my children. Joseph is gone, Simeon is gone, and now you want Benjamin? Everything is working against me." Jacob flatly refused to let Benjamin go, abandoning Simeon to his cell. But as the relentless famine dragged on, their food supplies dwindled to nothing. They had no other choice. With starvation looming, Jacob reluctantly agreed to send Benjamin packing double the money and premium gifts to appease the Egyptian ruler. Genesis chapter 43, verse 14 shows his bitter resignation. Israel finally surrendered, saying, "If it must be so, then do this. Fill your travel bags with the very finest delicacies of our dry land, to give to this man a little balm, a little sweet honey, precious spices, myrrh, some pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take twice as much silver with you, because you must return what was slipped into your sacks. Perhaps it was just an honest mistake. Take your brother Benjamin and go back to the governor immediately. May God Almighty grant you mercy before him, so he releases Simeon and lets Benjamin return. As for me, if I lose my children, I lose them." When Joseph finally saw his brother Benjamin, his heart nearly burst with emotion. He invited them to dine at his estate, arranging them exactly by age. The brothers were stunned, wondering how a foreign official could possibly know their order of birth. The men were seated before him, arranged exactly from the oldest to the youngest, seated in order from oldest to youngest. They stared at one another in total shock, as food was served directly from Joseph's own table. Benjamin's plate was piled 5 times higher than theirs. Still, they feasted and drank together, letting their guards down. Joseph was testing them once more, showering Benjamin with favor to see if jealousy would flare up again. But this time, the brothers showed no envy. They were genuinely happy for their youngest brother's blessing. At dawn, Joseph sent them home with grain, but secretly hid his silver cup inside Benjamin's pack. Soon, Joseph's guards overtook them, demanding a search. The cup was found, and they were dragged back to face Joseph's anger. Genesis chapter 44 captures their absolute despair. "What can we say to, 'My Lord,'" Judah cried in agony. "How can we possibly prove our innocence? God has uncovered our guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves." Yes, all of us, along with the one who had the cup. But Joseph refused, saying, "I would never do that. Only the man caught with the cup will become my slave. The rest of you can return to your father in peace." This was the ultimate test. Would they abandon Benjamin just like they abandoned Joseph years ago? Or had they truly changed? Judah's response revealed their transformation, as Genesis chapter 44 records his passionate plea. Then Judah stepped forward and pleaded, "Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word to you. Do not be angry with me, even though you stand equal to Pharaoh himself. So please let your servant stay here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return home with his brothers. How can I return to my father? Without the boy I cannot bear to see the misery that would destroy him." Judah, who once suggested selling his own brother Joseph, was now willing to become a slave himself to save Benjamin and spare their father's broken heart. They had truly changed. Unable to contain his emotion any longer, Joseph sent his servants away and revealed his identity. Genesis chapter 45 captures this breathtaking moment. Joseph said, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers stood frozen in fear, unable to speak a word. Then Joseph gently said to them, "Come closer to me." When they stepped forward, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." The brothers were paralyzed with fear, but Joseph rushed to comfort them. Genesis chapter 45 reveals his perspective on their past. "Do not be distressed now, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me, because God sent me ahead of you to save lives. For 2 years now, famine has ravaged the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or harvesting. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve your families and save you through a great deliverance. Ultimately, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of Egypt." Joseph recognized God's hand in his suffering. What his brothers intended for evil, God turned to good to save countless lives during this famine. Joseph urged his brothers to bring their father and entire families to Egypt, where they could survive the remaining years of severe famine. When Jacob heard that Joseph was alive and ruling in Egypt, Genesis chapter 45 describes his reaction. They told him Joseph is still alive. He is actually the ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was completely stunned and refused to believe them. But as they repeated everything Joseph had said, and when he saw the royal wagons Joseph sent to bring him back, the old man's spirit revived. Israel declared, "I am convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die." God then spoke to Jacob in a vision at Beersheba, encouraging the journey. Genesis chapter 46 records his promise. "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt," the Lord said, "for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back. Joseph's own hands will gently close your eyes when you die." Genesis chapter 46 tells us that, including the 2 sons born to Joseph in Egypt, the total number of Jacob's family members who settled there was 70 people in all. The reunion between Jacob and Joseph was emotional beyond words. Genesis chapter 46 captures this powerful moment. Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to Goshen to meet his father Israel. The moment they saw each other, Joseph threw his arms around his father and wept on his shoulder for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen with my own eyes that you are still alive." Pharaoh welcomed Jacob's family warmly, granting them the most fertile territory in Egypt, the region of Goshen, to pasture their flocks and herds. What began as a brief escape from famine became a 430-year stay that forged Jacob's family into the nation of Israel. Jacob lived there 17 years, watching them multiply and prosper. As his death drew near, Jacob called for Joseph to make a solemn request regarding his burial, and then blessed Joseph's 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, adopting them as his very own, granting them equal inheritance alongside his other sons. In a shocking prophetic move, Jacob crossed his hands, giving the greater blessing to the younger son, Ephraim, rather than Manasseh, the firstborn. Genesis chapter 48 records Jacob's refusal. "I know, my son, I know. He too will grow into a great nation, and he too will be great. Yet his younger brother will be even greater, and his offspring will become a multitude of nations." Finally, Jacob gathered all his sons to deliver his final blessings. Genesis chapter 49 records these final words over each tribe's future, some being remarkably positive, like Judah's blessing. "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until the true king comes to claim it, and to him shall be the obedience of the nations. Other blessings carried heavy consequences, like the curse Simeon and Levi earned for their cruelty at Shechem. I will scatter them across Jacob and disperse them in Israel. Genesis chapter 49 records his final peaceful breaths. Once Jacob finished instructing his sons, he pulled his feet up onto the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his ancestors. Joseph wept bitterly for his father and had him embalmed according to local customs. With Pharaoh's blessing, they carried Jacob's body back to Canaan, burying him in the cave of Machpelah alongside Abraham and Isaac. Once Jacob died, Joseph's brothers panicked, terrified that his long-buried anger would finally unleash on them. Genesis chapter 50, verse 15, captures their deep terror. Seeing their father gone, they whispered in fear, "What if Joseph still hates us? What if he seeks revenge for all the pain we caused him?" But Joseph answered with profound grace and mercy. Genesis chapter 50, verses 19 through 21, records his legendary response. "Do not be afraid," Joseph told them. "Am I in the place of God? You planned to destroy me, but God turned that evil into good to save countless lives. Do not worry. I will take care of you and your little ones." He comforted them with gentle words. Joseph eventually lived to be 110, witnessing his descendants grow for generations before he closed his eyes. Genesis chapter 50, verses 24 and 25 reveals his final breaths. He whispered, "My time has come. I'm about to die. But God will surely rescue you and carry you out of this land back to the home he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Then he made the people take a solemn vow, saying, "When God comes to save you, you must carry my bones with you." Even on his deathbed, Joseph clung tightly to the hope of God's holy promises. Egypt was just a temporary stop, not their home. God would lead them back. Genesis chapter 50, verse 26 closes this great book with his passing. Joseph passed away at 110 years old. They embalmed his body, placing him in a coffin in Egypt. Genesis ends with his people waiting in Egypt, far from home, yet perfectly positioned for the next spectacular chapter of his divine plan. The story that began at creation, suffered through the fall, and grew through covenants with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, now sets the stage for the rise of Israel and their ultimate escape back to the land promised to their ancestors. Across every page of Genesis, from Adam's fall to Joseph's final forgiveness, we witness God's relentless loyalty to his word, his power to use broken people, and his grand plan to bless the entire world through the family of Abraham. If this incredible journey through Genesis has inspired or challenged you, or revealed his hand in our history, we want you in our community. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment as we walk through the scriptures together. Your support helps us share these powerful, timeless stories with the world. Please don't keep this incredible message to yourself. Share this video with friends and family who want to understand how our world started and how God has worked behind the scenes since day one. Whether they are believers searching for depth or skeptics exploring these ancient tales, anyone can appreciate the breathtaking beauty and deep historic truths hidden in Genesis. Drop a comment below and tell me which story shook you the most. Was it the tragic fall of Adam and Eve, Abraham's wild journey of faith, or Joseph forgiving his brothers? I read every single comment, and I love seeing how these truths hit home today. Give this video a thumbs up if this journey through Genesis helped you. Share it on your feeds to help others discover these incredible accounts. Together, we can help others discover the very roots of our history and his beautiful plan to save us. Thanks for walking with me through this incredible book of beginnings. Until we meet again, may you find real hope, knowing that the God who built the stars, called Abraham, wrestled Jacob, and redeemed Joseph's pain, is working in your life this very moment. The story that began in Genesis lives on in you. Don't forget to subscribe and share. See you in the next video.